Excuse me, please make sure no one is seated next to you, okay? That's one rule we are supposed to follow. And the other is, you need to make sure you're not seated immediately behind somebody, and no one is seated immediately before you, okay? And that applies both to the students and to the faculty. Yeah, there's plenty of room. We made sure we didn't invite too many people so that these requirements would not be met. This part of the lecture hall isn't occupied at all. Very good. Just be sure you're not seated next to anyone, and there is at least one vacant, empty seat before you and after and behind you. My name is Krakowskie, and I'm American literature scholar and the director of the American Studies Center. I will be conducting this ceremony. I'll have several of my colleagues come over to the rostrum, but I will do a lot of talking here also. I think we should begin by standing up for the Polish hymn and the ode to joy.
Just imagine you having music.
Sorry about this. It's interesting. We started with this interesting glitch. Thank you. Please be seated. I'm muting my cell phone, and you might want to do the same. Okay, I'm very glad to see you. Normally, this is not normal, right? The restrictions are still imposed on this lecture hall. They've just been lifted because, as I said, only 6 days ago or so, the limit was 39 students. But things are getting slowly back to normal. Now it's 150 students, 150 individuals, bodies, can stay in this lecture hall, which pretty much reflects the way you're seated. So there has been nothing routine here in what we have been doing since March 2020. That's also the reason why we're not having a choir over to sing for us, because there is, of course, nothing sanitary about a large choir singing. But we wanted to hold a real-time event for our students. For those of you who could join us in person, but also for everyone else who could watch us today, who can watch us today on their laptops, their desktop computers. This event is being streamed and can be watched on our Facebook profile and also on our YouTube. But yes, we wanted to make we wanted to make you realize and understand that we are flesh and blood teachers and scholars, and I'm sure things are getting better, perhaps more slowly than we would like, but we will certainly see a lot more of you this coming semester. That said, even though still I could not invite everyone, we have been joined by a number of our faculty members, all of whom are here for a reason. I will be talking about their administrative capacities at the ASC, but also about their interests and themes that sort of guide their research. So maybe I should start with Professor Basiuk, who is the Director of the Institute of the Americas and Europe. Professor Basiuk is a specialist in American fiction, critical theory, cultural studies expert. I just want to welcome him. Please join me in that. I want to also welcome other faculty members who also play very important administrative positions. Dr. Małgorzata Gajda-Łaszewska. She's also our media expert teaching on media. Professor Kuźma Markowska. She is the head of the Teaching and Learning Council of the Institute of the Americas and Europe. And for those of you who don't quite understand this term, the Institute of the Americas and Europe, it's an umbrella term of a larger institution. And the American Studies Center is part of that, okay? So among the American Studies Center's faculty members or some of my colleagues play also important roles in this umbrella institution, the Institute of the Americas and Europe. Please join me in welcoming Professor Fredrik. Teaching and researching science fiction, audiovisual media, popular culture. Professor David Jones. He specializes in U.S. legal system, 21st century policy. Dr. Marcin Gajek, I don't know if he's with us here. He said he would. He's joining us today, probably with his son. His research interest, again, too bad he isn't here with us. His research interest is political thought, history of political thought, political philosophy, Republican traditions, American political thought, the theory of democracy. Professor Agnieszka Graf, again, please join me when welcoming her. She's a very well-known public intellectual and a very good colleague of ours. Her research interests include gender studies, feminist theory, and more recently, nationalism, and the public not entirely friendly discourse on gender. Dr. Ludmiła Janion. I want to welcome Dr. Ludmiła Janion. Her research and teaching interests include media, gender, and sexuality studies. Professor Stanisław Obirek is here with us. I doubt there is anyone in this room who doesn't recognize him as a person, as a public intellectual. A full professor of humanities, a culture anthropologist teaching about religion, teaching philosophy at the American Studies Center. We're very proud to have him. Dr. Richard Schnepf, Ambassador Richard Schnepf, again, a very important public figure in the Polish public life. I'm sure you have seen him in the media. You have heard him speak. He's a historian, a political scientist, a practitioner of diplomacy, and as you know, I'm sure many of you know, he was a 4 times ambassador to several different Latin American countries and to Spain and I guess most crucially at this point to the United States. Professor Anna Sosnowska was here. Professor Anna Sosnowska, please join me in welcoming her. She's a sociologist. Her research focuses on migration from Eastern Europe. And American cities. Dr. Marta Usiekniewicz is here with us. She specializes in gender, sexuality studies, feminism, and body studies. Who else is with us? Gabriela Jeleńska. Hector has just joined us, but Gabriela Jeleńska is also our good colleague. She teaches Native American studies. And Dr. Hector Calleros, a political interested in the political processes and conflicts and tensions caused by ethnicity, interested in political institutions. So as you can see, we have a very interesting array of Americanists from various disciplines, ranging from political science through social sciences, history, literature, gender studies, science fiction. Forgive me. Okay, I should say a few words about the American Studies Center as a place. It's one of the largest American studies institutions. We were established, believe it or not, in 1976. So we celebrate as the 40th anniversary some 5 years ago or so. So we were established long before the collapse of communism, and originally this the center stemmed from a very close and interesting cooperation between the University of Warsaw and Indiana University in Bloomington. And as a result of this cooperation, back in those days, scholars, American scholars and Polish scholars decided to establish 2 somewhat parallel institutions, American Studies Center in Warsaw and a Polish Studies Center in Bloomington. Okay, so that's how it all began. Of course, that's something you know. We teach U.S. American Studies and more widely understood American Studies. Notice how I'm being careful with those terms. I don't say American Studies sort of automatically. Now I'm being careful to say we do U.S. American Studies and American, and we begin to broaden the scope increasingly to include American studies as such, and of course that term also includes many other countries in the Western Hemisphere. Our program is to a great extent multidisciplinary. We combining political science, history, economics, culture, religion studies, art history, and literature. I happen to be a scholar of literature. We have scholars from Poland, the United States, from Mexico. We're joined by many adjunct, visiting, associate faculty. We associate with and invite scholars with extensive North American, US, Mexican, Cuban experience. We have a large American Studies library. All our instruction is in English. Some can be in Spanish. We're an English language department, and that's that's quite unique among departments within the University of Warsaw. We of course promote American Studies as a discipline. We hold conferences, we hold debates, and you will be able to attend many of those. Hopefully in person. I'm talking about the large events. Not many of them will be, not all of them will be in person in this semester, but I think we all have the feeling that we're moving slowly towards some kind of normalcy. We publish 2 peer-reviewed journals, you should know that we are at the moment at Niepodległości 22. That's the building many of you visited. But in all likelihood, next year, 22-23, we all will be moving to a new building at Dobra 55, which is only a 5-minute walk downhill from here. I suggest that you regularly check our website. We very regularly update our website, our events section, so we will organize a very special training explaining to you how to get the hang of things at the ASC as a place and as a virtual place as well. And of course we run all kinds of social media. We have Facebook profiles. I encourage you to join many of these virtual places. That said, we are going back to the real place and to in-person instruction, hopefully for good. I'll have some of my other colleagues speak, and I think I should begin with Professor Tomasz Basiuk, the director of this, as I said, this umbrella institution, the Institute of the Americas and Europe. He will want to say hello to you, Professor Basiuk.
Thank you, Grzegorz. Thank you, Professor Kość. I'll be very brief. It is my role to welcome you, and this welcome is a welcome, an introduction to what is usually called the academic community. And to be quite honest, I have a problem with this term community for the reason that it implies a sense of unity, a sense that we are all of the same opinion and so on, which of course is not the case, especially at the university. And so I prefer the word collective, and so I'll welcome you to the academic collective. And what I mean by saying collective rather than community is that it seems to me the term collective underscores that we often work at cross purposes and not always for the same purpose, that we differ in our views, that there are levels of trust but also levels of mistrust, that there are calculations which people make, for all kinds of reasons, but also miscalculations that we all make. And one of the things that I keep thinking about in the context of this ceremony and the opening of the new year is the kind of dialectic between optimism and pessimism. There were words of optimism which we have just heard from Professor Kość about the coming academic year, and I share in that optimism. But it's also difficult to forget that we are in a very difficult situation, that there is, that we're in the midst of an epidemic, that there is all kinds of political trouble inside, which I don't want to get into, but I'm sure that we can all think of our own perspectives on that. There is, of course, the question of climate, which I think Professor Fiedorczuk will speak about in a few minutes. And so there is this very tense dialectical opposition and kind of give and take between what I'm very broadly addressing as pessimism and optimism. And I certainly don't mean to say that, optimists are simply naive or that pessimists are simply, depressed and wrong about things. But it seems to me that one of the functions of what I'm proposing that we can call our collective is that we can kind of even each other out a little bit, that we can, have optimists address the pessimists and have pessimists address the optimists, and that we can maybe find a kind of middle of the road position, which may simply be more comfortable for us, especially as a group of people, than a kind of extreme siding with one or the other choice that we are faced with, and we'll be faced with many choices. And so I'm offering this word collective, and I want to offer one more term before I conclude those remarks. And this other term is, you may think it's taken from banking or finances or something, and it is in a way, but it's a term which I think is practically useful to us, which is risk management. We are in a situation which requires very intense risk management. And for example, whether we are seated next to each other and how close. Are we going to wear masks or not? Are we going to be meeting in person or perhaps sometimes not meeting in person? All of this is about managing risk. I'm very confident that we can, as a collective, manage risks in an adequate way in the situation that we are in. And I'm especially thinking of the epidemic, but also other things. I'm very confident that under Professor Kości's leadership and under the leadership of the university, of the faculty who are gathered here and those who are not here, but perhaps are watching us online, that we can do this with your participation, and that you will be important agents in this practice of collective, which will necessarily entail the management of risk. I hope this isn't too pessimistic of me to be saying this today. I want to welcome you to the academic collective. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Basiuk. I'll now let Professor Sylwia Kuźma-Markowska speak. As I said, she's the head of the Teaching and Learning Council at the IE, the Institute of the Americas and Europe. She will want to say hello to you and probably also speak on those dark tones. So it's important that you recognize her as a very important official overseeing your program.
Right, so thank you so much for the introduction. So I will be very, very practical, right? And not pessimistic, not optimistic. I would like to encourage you to get involved into the collective that Professor Basiuk was speaking about, right? And would like to tell how to make an impact on what is going on in the American Studies Center. And there are at least two very practical ways to do this. One is to get involved into the Students' Union, which is Samorząd Studencki, which is a very important role for students to play in such bodies as the Teaching Council or the Council of the Institute of the Americas and Europe. So these bodies, they take decisions pertaining to studying, to diplomas, to classes that you take. So in order to influence the decisions, so the getting involved is crucial. Another opportunity that I would like to mention are research groups that we have at the American Studies Center that bring together scholars and students who are interested in such issues as science fiction, gender and sexuality, politics, Brazil, and many, many others. So to be members of our collective, get involved. Thank you so much, and welcome.
Thank you, Professor Kuzma-Markowska. And now I'll ask Małgorzata Gajda, Dr. Małgorzata Gajda, the ASC Counselor for Students Affairs, somebody whom some of you will be seeing quite a lot. She is the official to talk to if you want to leave, if you want to negotiate your exam. She's a very good person to talk to if you're in trouble.
Yes, I'm also very happy to be a welcoming team. And yeah, I'll try to, okay. Yes, I'm a counselor for Students Affairs, which means that I am the third step in the first aid kit. The first one is the rules of study at the University of Warsaw. The second one is the office and the people working at the dean's office. And the third is me. The fourth is Professor Kuzma-Markowska. So, this is what I'm here for. And that's right, I'm mostly doing conflict solving and trouble solving, and so I'm here for you. And to refer to the encounters between optimists and pessimists, I have two very important messages at the start. To make it possible, you just have to make two steps to be able to come to classes. So you know that you all had your email accounts established by the university. I know that most of you do not have a habit yet to check them. Please do, because all important reminders and messages go there, and we cannot reach you in any other way than this. So please do. And the second one is, if you want to see us next week, and we are really looking forward to meeting you all, you need to register for classes. Please remember, there are deadlines for registration, and not all of you have already performed your duties. So please remember about this. We are looking forward to meeting you in person, yes, with all the risk management and security in place, but in this case, we are traditionalists. We believe in personal contacts, in handshakes, maybe in future, but definitely eye contact and smiles and all these wonderful things that we get when we are with you. So good luck for the new year. I'm there to help if you need me, and please check your mail and register. See you next week.
Thank you, Dr. Gajda. Now, there is such a position as opiekun pierwszego roku, which in English is BA Freshman Counselor. Dr. Marta Usiekniewicz, I'll ask her to come forward and say a few words to you. I know that she's planning, I'm hoping I'm not spoiling your news, she's planning a training session for you how to survive the American Studies Center. Please.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to see some people here. I assume you're all wearing pants, which is a new thing when addressing a large audience in the recent months. I am mostly here to assist and help the transition between attending high school and starting to study at the university. And for that, together with some colleagues at the ASC, we are organizing what we call an orientation session. These will be 2 online sessions for students of the first year of BA studies. Actually, one of the people involved in the orientation is here with us, Dr. Ludmiła Janyan. And please, once you set up your email and check your email, you will receive many, many emails inviting you to join an online orientation session. This is to make sure that everyone who who wants can attend. This is where, I think I've changed the name. It's no longer How to Survive at ASC. Given the pandemic context, I felt that maybe we should move away from the terms of survival. And I think right now these are guidelines of how to do well at the ASC. Because it's all about the positive message. I'm team optimism, definitely. We shall see. Anyway, please, in order to kind of have a chance to take part in the orientation, please make sure you also follow ASC's social media. This is also where we will post all the information and details. Two more things that I want to mention is that apart from attending your classes for which you register, as per Dr. Gajda's advice, OSA is also involved in organizing a lot of events that are addressed to you specifically and kind of designed to be interesting to you. I am, for example, one of the persons involved in a series of lectures called American Studies Colloquium Series. Also make sure to check when these events are happening and how to participate. This year we will be continuing with them online because we couldn't anticipate how the pandemic will affect public meetings, but hoping that we will once again get to invite actual professors to actual rooms in the future. I am, I think, your first point of contact if you are in doubt what to do in a given situation. So if you're experiencing as a first-year student, a BA first-year student, if you're experiencing any problems, you can also contact me and I'll try to direct you to the right person. So thank you and welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Osiekniewicz. Professor Kuźma-Markowska mentioned the student union. I was hoping somebody from the student union would join us today, but simply there is no one in that capacity. The president of the American Studies Center Students Union is already a former president, so that was a disappointment to me. I asked her, she basically limited herself to writing a message to you as a former president. Here's what she wrote. Dear students, on behalf of the American Studies Center Students Union, it's my pleasure to welcome you at the inauguration of the new academic year at the ASC. Until May this year, I was the president of the Students Union, even though I am no longer performing this function. I would like to know that in case you have any problems, doubts, and questions, you can still contact the former president of the Student Union. I have a message to the first-year BA and MA students. I hope that you will spend here a wonderful time full of great memories, lifetime friendship, and extensive knowledge about the U.S. And to older students, I hope that you are ready for the challenges of the new academic year, and that you will enter it with energy and optimism. I wish you a great academic year. Aleksandra Mackiewicz, former president of the American Studies Center Students Union. So that's the message she asked me to read out loud. Again, we are hoping to work with a vigorous student union as soon as it elects itself. And before we move to the lecture, which is probably the most important part of this gathering, I want to introduce one last guest. Please join me in welcoming Alicja Relizyńska. She's a representative of the ASC doctoral students in doctoral schools. I wanted to make you sort of aware that that what we're offering is a comprehensive program that for some of you may mean really getting to the level of the doctoral pro program as well.
Okay, so thank you very much. It's very nice to see you in person finally. Dear students, on behalf of the ASC Doctoral students, I wish to congratulate you on your choice of studies, because here at the American Studies Center, you are able not only to learn about the United States, both as a country and as a cultural construct, but also you are able, if you wish, if you feel that that's the right path for you, you can pursue an academic career, and you can get all the necessary tools to do research, which, believe me, is super important and is a really great opportunity. So congratulations again, and I wish you the best of luck with your studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, to kick off this academic year, we've planned a special treat for you. A lecture by Professor Julia Fiedorczuk-Glinecka. She is, I'm sure many of you have heard about her. She is also a public intellectual, increasingly known in the public realm. She is an associate professor teaching American literature at the Institute of English Studies. Her PhD was on Laura Riding, an American poet, and then her habilitation, postdoctoral degree, that was awarded on the merits of her work that is becoming her magnum opus of her work on ecopoetics. She lectures on environmental poetry. She lectures on that nexus between poetry and ecology. She's interested in the, I guess, power of poetry to change human imagination and look at nature differently. Very recently, she gave a lecture on the poetries of the Anthropocene. I don't know if you all understand what the Anthropocene is. It's a kind of a new unit of geologic time, which is leaving layers or strata of plastic, radioactive particles, CDs, batteries, cables, and whatnot. That's the new geologic stratum that we're leaving behind. This year, Professor Julia Fiedorczuk, she's established the Laboratory of Ecopoetics at the Department of Modern Languages, Warsaw University. She's a real public intellectual. She's best known for popularizing ecopoetics, ecological poetry. She has a column in Przekrój. I don't know how many of you read Przekrój. She has another column in Polityka, some of the most prestigious Polish magazines for the general reader. Most recently, for instance, I think 2 weeks ago or so, she wrote about forms of communication between and among animals. She is, I understand, an unsparing critic of anthropocentrism, the belief, and again, let me help you with the term, the belief that value is focused on human beings, that all other beings in the world are means to our ends. She believes this is a very inadequate basis for environmental action, for any action really. It is ethically wrong and pragmatically ineffective. She is a public intellectual of great and growing stature. For instance, suffice to mention, she's sitting on the jury awarding the annual Ryszard Kapuściński Prize. I understand she had a say in awarding Ryszard Kapuściński Prize to Jessica Bruder not so long ago, right? The other day. The author of Nomadland. I don't know if you've read the book, but many of you have seen, I'm sure, the movie. Among her academic books, I'll start with her academic books, Inne możliwości, o poezji, polityce i ekologii. Cyborg w ogrodzie, wprowadzenie do ekokrytyki, ecopoetics. Those are the titles of her recent academic books. She would write about Walt Whitman, of ecologically minded poets of the 19th century, Walt Whitman, Henry David Thoreau, of course, Ralph Waldo Emerson, but also she's written on Merwin, who died not so long ago, a few months back, Mary Oliver, Wendell Berry, Archie Ammons. Those are the poets, American poets, who are particularly concerned with ecology. She is an author of a collection of short stories, Bliskie kraje, 2 novels, Nieważkość I Pod słońcem, and as many as 5 poetry collections, and I want to mention 3 of them. You know, as I said, I'm a literary scholar, and especially interested in poetry. Planeta Rzeczy Zagubionych, 2006, Tlen, Oxygen, 2009, and Psalmy, which came out 2 years ago in 2019, published by Fundacja Tymoteusza Karpowicza. That's the very book for which she got the Wisława Szymborska Prize, certainly the most prestigious poetry prize in Poland. Professor Julia Fiedorczuk's poems were translated into, I read somewhere that it's 20 languages, but English, Swedish, Czech, Japanese, believe it or not, Welsh. One critic wrote of this volume, the Psalms, the Psalms lend their voice to marginalized or silent groups, including plants, animals, and nature. They are lamentations, mourning extinct species and ecosystems. And I decided to close this introduction of Professor Fiedorczuk as an intellectual and as an artist by quoting one of her psalms. That will be Psalm 31. It's originally written in Polish, but it's been translated by Bill Johnston, a translator and professor of comparative literature at Indiana University. He has recently written about Professor Fiedorczuk's poetry in Harvard Review. Psalm 31. A chickadee had perched on the windowsill like a message generated by the mist. October was turning into November in the birches, oaks, alders, in the frost-resistant flowers, in the cemeteries where our fathers wrote no memoirs, where they would not recognize our children, our poems, ourselves. The television was showing Poland that had perished, and then had not perished, and then again had perished, and then not. And then the sun flung up a mesh of branches. All at once, the chickadee was absorbed by the sky. Before I could say, remember me. Okay. So that's a, I think, wonderful poem about human memory, human scale, pitted against powers that be, and lesser interest in memory that we find among other species, I guess. Today, Professor Fiedorczuk will deliver a lecture, To See the World Before the End of the World, 21st Century Poetry in the Face of Planetary Catastrophe. Without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Julia Fiedorczuk.
Well, thank you, Professor Koch. This was really moving and a very, very generous introduction. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here. Thanks for the invitation to the American Studies Center and to all of you for being here. This is super exciting. It's the first time I have addressed a live audience of students since March of the Zozo year. So I'm really, really excited. Well, I'm sorry that when it comes to the spectrum of pessimism and optimism that was discussed earlier, the title of my lecture is To See the Earth Before the End of the World, 21st Century Poetry in the Face of Planetary Catastrophe. So I guess I'm not beginning on a very optimistic note. The title is somewhat apocalyptic, actually. I do hope this isn't going to be the last note that we're ending on later on. It's not going to be very long, right? This is going to be a very short lecture. And the main question that I'm going to try to address is this. In what way does poetry relate to the present ecological crisis involving, as we well know, climate change, accelerating species extinction, the loss of animal habitats, plastic pollution, water crisis, and multiple other crises which are interrelated and which are increasingly felt in all parts of the planet. What does poetry have to do with this? How does this profound change of our world impact contemporary poetry and other art forms? How does it impact the way in which we do our work as, I'm a literature scholar, right? I think of myself as someone who is working within what is called the environmental humanities, right? So how does that impact the kind of intellectual work that we do as literature scholars or simply as readers of literature? How can poetry, and more broadly, literature and the arts, how can they help us address and process the challenges we're facing? The challenges that are also increasingly causing psychological problems, such as climate depression, or what psychologists refer to as the pre-traumatic stress disorder, right? The pre-traumatic stress disorder is the kind of stress disorder that doesn't come after a traumatic experience, but that comes before an experience that is likely to happen and that is likely to be traumatizing, right? So can we find in literature, can we find in poetry some ways to work it through somehow, right? Some ways to understand it. So we're going to look at a couple of poems in this talk, but also at a lot of pictures to try to think about the profound material change that is happening in our world and to think about the implications of this change, for instance, for how we think about our place on this planet in relation to other beings, to other phenomena and processes. And I do hope to show, although I have very little time, so I hope this is just going to be an encouragement, that poetry as a lively laboratory of the imagination can actually help, right? That it can actually help us in this moment when we feel so desperate often, right? And helpless, and when we would rather sort of switch off and not think about what's happening. So that's why we're starting with this somewhat apocalyptic title, which I stole from the poet Ed Robertson. So you have the old picture of Ed Robertson on the right. You see the poet in Alaska, and Ed Robertson spent some time working in Alaska, working with glaciers, examining glaciers. And so this is important because for the scientists who work with ice generally, or who work with glaciers, I mean, they are on the forefront when it comes to realizing how fast climate change is happening, right? Because glaciers are melting. So this is a very palpable sort of experience of how things are changing. So this experience also influences his poetic practice. And on the left, you see the cover of the book, To See the Earth Before the End of the World. The book came out in 2010. And for me, this book is an example of the best kind of poetry, or the most interesting from my perspective kind of poetry that's written in the 21st century. Sometimes it's referred to as poetry of the self-conscious Anthropocene. We'll maybe get back to that term a little bit later. But I like Robertson's poetry because it's formally complex and it's intellectually complex in that it addresses an interrelated set of problems that we're facing, including ecological and social problems, right? So one of the main issues in Ed Robertson's poetry is this question of consumerist culture and how consumerist culture is connected with extractive economies, right? When you think about extraction, a kind of logic of extraction, we think immediately about what the corporations are doing, right? When they approach a piece of land and when they want to extract things out of the earth, right? So you extract fossil oils. This is what our economy is based on, right? World's economy is based on the extraction of fossil fuels. But it's not just that, right? Because what else is being extracted? Also human bodies. When you think about colonialism, it's especially the non-white bodies, other kinds of bodies that were also extracted for value, right, for profit. So this sort of attitude towards the earth, towards human bodies and other bodies, non-human bodies, this attitude of wanting to extract profit, this is something that Ed Robertson addresses in his work. But then if you think about how this logic of extraction actually comes into our lives, right? How even the way we speak very often is permeated with metaphors that are borrowed from that kind of economy, right? When you always think about what you can have, or what you can squeeze out of a certain experience, what you can, how you can benefit from reading a book, or what you can get out of a relationship with another person. This is all somehow connected with this logic of extraction. So Robertson's poetry goes against this logic of extraction, and also it shows how you cannot divorce ecology from economy, because one of the myths in our world, we're constantly being told that economy is the serious science, right? So you get experts who tell you what's possible, what's impossible, whereas ecology is this frivolous thing, for people who like trees, and so they go into the woods and then they look at things and admire, and that's what it is. Whereas in fact, there is no outside to ecology, right? Ecology is about how all the processes on this planet are interconnected and how they influence one another. And if you look at the words economy and ecology, they actually share the same, they have the same root, right? Because the eco, the prefix eco, goes back to the ancient Greek word oikos, which means something like a shared household, right? So these two words, economy and ecology, are closely related, and so are the social problems, and the so-called ecological problems. You cannot take them apart. So here's a fragment which comes at the very beginning of this book by Ed Robertson. I'll read it. Just so that you can listen to it. And don't worry if it's hard, because it's difficult. Poetry, this is, the thing about poetry is that it is sometimes difficult at the first sight. And it's absolutely okay. But just, if you could just listen to this sound. People are grabbing at the chance to see the earth before the end of the world's death piece by piece, each longer than we. Some endings of the world overlap our lived time, skidding for generations for the crash scene of species extinction, the 5 minutes it takes for the plane to fall, the mile ago it takes to stop the train, the small bay to coast the liner into the ground, the line of title to a nation until the land dies, the continent uninhabitable. So I just wanted to read it for the sound of it, and we don't have the time to analyze this fragment very closely, but let us just look at the very beginning. People are grabbing at the chance to see the earth before the end of the world's death, piece by piece, each longer than we. So, what is happening is that the world is dying piece by piece. These pieces are larger than we. They are larger when it comes to their time scale. They are, perhaps more important than each of us individually when it comes to the life-sustaining systems on this planet. And our sort of first reaction is to grab at the chance to see the Earth before the end of the world. So it seems to me that this kind of seeing that Robertson is referring in the first line here is a kind of seeing which is precisely connected with this grabbing, right? So it's connected with this extractive economy that I talked about earlier. Because you can look, it is possible to look like this. It is possible to look in a greedy way, to look in a way which wants to own, which wants to possess and control, which wants to colonize. So, maybe we can think about fast tourism, like, going to places where you go to places where something is almost extinct, and it's kind of cool to see something that is almost extinct precisely because it's so rare, but because we so much want to see a culture that is almost, almost extinct, or some few remaining fragments of wilderness, we actually accelerate this extinction, right? Or there is another moment later on in the book where he has this image of people chasing glaciers, and that's also, this paradox, how glaciers are melting. People are chasing glaciers to see, to have your chance to see a glacier before, it goes away. But of course, the fact that people are chasing glaciers accelerates the melting, right? So my interpretation of this beginning is that this grabbing at the chance to see the Earth has to do with this extractive impulse, right, that our culture teaches us, that we want to get this and grab this, and see as much as we can before it is too late. The question is whether another way of looking is possible, whether another way of seeing the Earth before the end or the ends of the world is possible, and hopefully that's where we're going to get at the end if I don't run out of time before I say the things that I plan to say. So I just wanted to make it clear about this logic of extraction. Can you follow this? What I'm saying so far? Is it okay? So this logic of extraction and how this disappearance, the crisis, actually, the first reaction that we have to the crisis is this sort of panicky reaction of wanting even more, actually. So this reaction that we have is perhaps not the most, practical, or not the most adequate reaction to the crisis. Another interesting thing in this fragment is that the Earth is not, of course, synonymous with the world, right? The Earth is not dying. The world is dying. The world, or worlds, perhaps even in the plural. And they are dying all the time. So we could think about this. We don't have the time to go into it very deeply, but I just wanted to draw your attention to this difference, right? Because poems have this quality that they are very careful in how they use words. So here, I think it is important that the Earth and the world are two different words which are not synonymous. So when it comes to the end of the world, right? I know, this sounds apocalyptic. If we have time at the end, we will address this question of the apocalypse a little bit, which I'm sort of quite against the apocalyptical imagination. But when it comes to the end of the world, or the end of the worlds, which are happening for people, and for other creatures all the time, there are some related terms. Professor Kość already explained the term the Anthropocene. So it's a proposed new geological epoch, right? It still has not been accepted by the scientific community. It is probably going to be accepted later this year, like maybe next year. But at the moment, the term the Anthropocene is used mostly by humanities scholars, and it is supposed to denote the new geological epoch, which is dating back from the it says, from the commencement of significant human impact on Earth's geology and ecosystem, including climate change and species extinction. So the way in which geological epochs are marked is that there are these characteristic geological markers that Professor Kość spoke about at the beginning. So in the case of the Anthropocene, the marker for our catastrophe, the marker for our epoch would be located somewhere in mid-20th century, at the beginning of what is called the Great Acceleration in terms of economy, in terms of technology, plastic production, and so on and so forth. So this is roughly how the beginning of the Anthropocene would be dated. And now, the term, the Anthropocene, as I'm sure is very easy to understand, means the age of man, right? And so you might think that this age of mankind, right, is something to be proud of. However, it is important to realize that the geological epochs are structured by catastrophes, right? So the change from one epoch to the next is always has always been a kind of natural catastrophe, such as the fall of the meteorite, for instance, right? So the meteorite falls, it destroys a lot of life, there's mass die out, right? A mass extinction event, we go to a new epoch. So in our case, our culture is this meteorite, right? That has fallen on the earth, and that is causing this great extinction event. So the great extinction event that we are witnessing is the so-called sixth great extinction, sometimes referred to as Holocene extinction or Anthropocene extinction. And as far as we know, it's the first time in the history of this planet when one of the species has caused this sort of event. Okay. I knew this was going to happen. It always happened. Okay. All right. So just to look at some pictures, maybe you're familiar with these pictures. The first two come from the film. Has anybody seen this documentary, The Anthropocene, that came out a couple of years ago? It is a film that documents, the changes, the profound changes to the planet which are brought about by various human activities. And it's kind of controversial because it shows, because of how these images are also somehow strangely attractive, right, and great, and how there is almost a kind of pride in how people are capable of transforming the earth. But anyway, this is I'm sorry, the date is wrong. Of course, it's 2015. It's an open pit coal mine in Westphalia in Germany. This is okay, this was not intended. This is plastic recycling in Kenya. So another image from the Anthropocene. Amazon in 2019, last summer, we saw a lot of these images, right? We're almost getting used to these images of burning Amazon and other wooded areas. And this is a picture that I took. And it's, does anybody know this? Does anybody know what it is? Is anybody from near Konin by any chance? That area is actually very beautiful, right? It's lakes and it's quite attractive in some way, but also it's really badly affected by Poland's second largest open pit coal mine. And what it causes is that the level of groundwaters is going down, so lakes are disappearing gradually, which causes some really weird situations where you have, like water infrastructure just basically sticking out of the land, and you don't understand why it's there. So it's a very strange landscape. But this is a power plant. There are quite a few in the area, and this power plant is called the Titanic by the local people, and they often go, like it's a custom that people go and take photographs in the evening against this image of the Titanic. So I thought this is, these are the ironies of the Anthropocene, how, there is a kind of strange haunting beauty in some of these images that I guess makes it even harder for us to relate to what's happening in an adequate way, right? In a way that would help us solve the problems. All right, so those are some images, and when you look at those images, when you spend some time with climate science, yes, and everybody should do it, but it's very difficult. For example, when you spend some time with the last IPCC report, I don't know if you're aware of the IPCC report, which was published last summer, and which address the condition of the climate. So when you spend some time with these things, it's hard. It changes everything, to refer to the famous title of a book by Naomi Klein. And Naomi Klein, when she wrote this book in response to the climate catastrophe, what she had in mind is that climate change exposes the deeply dysfunctional and erroneous nature of economy based on consumerism and on this idea of infinite growth. And of course, this is a fact, because what we know for certain, the only thing that we know for certain is that the world, as we know it, is going to end, right? The world like this is not going to survive. Or, to quote the ecofeminist Val Plumwood, we will go onwards in a different mode of humanity, or not at all, right? So some world definitely has to end, or some worlds definitely have to end. From my perspective, I like to use this quote or this title by Klein and to relate it to the humanities, because I think this also changes everything when it comes to how we practice arts. I think it also changes everything when it comes to how we write poetry and how we read poetry, right? Because it would be nonsensical now to write pastoral poetry or to, create pastoral images that present some sort of a harmonious relationship with nature, whatever it is. So, so I'm going to show first some photographs and then some fragments from poems to show you the change, right? To show you this change that Klein is talking about, and how it, how it happens also on the level of visual representation, how it happens also on the level of poems, and then what happens next. So this first image, it's a picture by a famous American photographer, Ansel Adams. He was a photographer of the American West and an environmentalist. And this is taken somewhere in the Yosemite National Park, and the title is The Sound of Silence, right? So what you see in this image, and perhaps at the first glance, you don't even think of it as an image, right? You don't even think of it as an artwork, right? But it is an artwork. A photograph is an artwork. So this artwork shows a sort of a pristine landscape. So first of all, no humans, right? And no human artifacts. It's what is sometimes referred to as a virgin, as virgin nature. It's actually quite an awful term, right? But it's this virgin land, yes? Or it's this pristine nature that has not been yet transformed by humans in any way. And the suggestion is that nature is beautiful, healing, right? So you go there and you find silence. Silence is something that people like because we find it healing, right? So this is sort of an image that gives us this idea about non-human nature. Now the second image, and this is a photograph taken in 1974 by Stephen Shore, and you see this image is very different. It's also a landscape, but this landscape ironically shows that a landscape is always a fabrication, that it's always a certain artifice, always a kind of artifice is involved. So here, ironically, the word, sunset is not a sunset, but you see the word sunset, right? And sunset is the name of a cinema, and cinema, it's a cinema, right? And cinema is also the art form that deals with images. So it's a very autotelic image. It's a very autotelic photograph of a certain landscape where you have both human-made stuff, and you have the so-called natural setting as well. But you see that it's a very different take on what a landscape is, right? This landscape is already a hybrid landscape, and it's thematized. The hybridity of the landscape is somehow thematized in this photograph. Now the third one by William Granier, this one was taken in the 1990s. TV in bio, right? You can see the TV, right? And it's a photograph that plays with the notion of nature photography, that plays with the notion of a kind of a pastoral representation, right, of a landscape. But this pastoral is a contaminated pastoral. Once again, this landscape is a hybrid landscape. It's a contaminated pastoral setting because it is a wild place, but this wild place has already been in contact with human beings, and also it's a TV, right? So once again, it's something that is suggestive of the visual art somehow. And the fourth image, once again, from the Anthropocene, from the film The Anthropocene, the photographer's name is Edward Burtyński, so it's the newest image. And what's interesting here is that Burtyński takes on the challenge to represent the scale, right? Because that's one of the big problems that we have when we think about climate change. How do we talk about something that is so huge? How do we talk about, or the Anthropocene, how do we talk in art? How do we address a process, a phenomenon, which encompasses the entire planet? So the images in the Anthropocene are a certain attempt to address this question of scale. And now let's look at some poems. Okay, so the first poem here, so I keep saying that climate change and this planetary catastrophe changes everything, that it also changes everything for poets, right? Here we have a poem from the 19th century by Walt Whitman, who is of course a wonderful poet, one of the founders or fathers of American poetry, as we used to say. But I would like to look at this poem maybe somewhat critically, also to see what image of non-human nature it was possible to have in a poem in the 19th century. So let's just read some bits of it. Give me the splendid silent sun, with all his beams full dazzling. Give me juicy autumnal fruit, ripe and red from the orchard. Give me a field where the unmowed grass grows. Give me an arbor. Give me the trellised grape. Give me fresh corn and wheat. Give me serene moving animals, teaching content. I skip. Give me for marriage a sweet-breathed woman of whom I should never tire. Give me a perfect child. Give me a way, aside from the noise of the world, a rural domestic life. I skip a little bit. Give me solitude. Give me nature. Give me again, oh nature, your primal sanities. See, so this is a classical romantic nature poem, right? That comes before all of these changes that we talked about. And so for Whitman can say nature, can address nature with a capitalized N, as if it was some sort of an almost divine power. This is how romantic poets often addressed nature, as if it was some sort of a transcendental power, right? So this capitalized nature that he almost prays to, or actually not almost, that he's praying to, that he's asking to give him all these things. And what are these things? These things are primal sanities, right? So there's this idea that nature has this primal order, that it's a good order, that, we go there for good things, such as a good wife, for instance. Interestingly, the man is the one who addresses nature, right? Whereas the woman actually belongs to nature in this, in this poem, right? And that's often the case with these, for example, 19th century representations of non-human nature, that it will often be presented as feminine, whereas women would often be naturalized also in this kind of logic. So just quickly, because we don't have the time, look at how this changes with another poem, and that is a poem from the 90s by A.R. Emmons. Let's just read the very beginning. Garbage has to be the poem of our time, because garbage is spiritual, believable enough to get our attention, getting in the way, piling up, stinking, turning brooks brownish and creamy white. I'll stop here. So if we had more time, we would be able to show that Emmons is actually continuing the tradition of Walt Whitman in many ways. Like the two images that I show, like the images that I showed you, that the photographs that were all somehow alluding to nature photography, but in ironic ways. Here you also have a sort of continuation of this traditional nature poetry, but it's no longer traditional nature poetry because of the fact that it is no longer possible to write in such a way, right? Because it simply wouldn't be true. It simply wouldn't be adequate. And now, the newest poem by Kamil Danji. This comes from the poem Blue, which was published once again in 2010. And let's read some fragments here. When we live to see the caterpillar rot everything they walk on, sea cliff, buckwheat cleared, relentless ice plant to replace it, the wild fields bisected by the seeming highway, canyons covered with cul-de-sacs, gas stations, comfortable homes, the whole habitat along this coastal stretch endangered, everything, everyone, everywhere in it, danger as well. But now they're logging, the one stealing hawk, Smith sides, the conspiring grasses, shh, shh, shh. The coreopsis, Matoni's boot barely spares, and netted a solitary blue butterfly. So what happens in this poem, let me just explain it quickly. Rudy Matoni was a scientist who discovered this species of a butterfly, which is called Smith's blue. And Matoni and his friend Claude Smith were hiking in the area of Big Sur in the 1950s, and that's when they discovered this butterfly. And this Smith was soon killed in a really weird accident. So after it was confirmed that this is a new butterfly species, Matoni named it for his friend, and that's why it gets this name, the Blue Smith. But the point, or the starting point for the poem that Danji writes is a lecture that she listens to by this scientist Matoni, who is now 50 years later lecturing about the extinction of this butterfly. Right. So it's and if you look at the poem carefully, you see that it actually presents two landscapes. That it shows how two landscapes overlap. How there is this old landscape in the 50s, when they went into the wild, let's say, right, to look for this butterfly, and they found this butterfly, and how 50 years later, everything has been destroyed by caterpillar, everything has been transformed into highways and streets and homes, right, and how 50 years later, this butterfly is almost extinct. So we have sort of we looked at a history of representations of nature in photography and in poetry, and we have now come back more or less to the starting point, where we started with Ed Robertson. We are in the 21st century poetry of the self-conscious Anthropocene, which is no longer nature poetry, which kind of comes to term with the fact that this pure pristine nature no longer exists, and that we can't write in this way. In this way anymore with Kamil Danji. And Danji is one of the poets who introduced the theme of mourning into her work. And so when we talk about affect, and when we talk about the emotional consequences of the Anthropocene and climate catastrophe, one of the things that we have to address is mourning. And to go through this mourning, because we are losing things, right? We are losing things all the time. And things are lost beyond recovery. There is plenty to be saved, and that's the next step. We're probably not going to get there because I'm running out of time, but before we can actually start saving things, or before we can realize how much there's still that we can save, that there's always something to be saved, there's this first step of actually seeing how much is being lost, right? And really seeing how much is being lost involves mourning. So one more quote. For humanity to survive in the Anthropocene, we need to learn to live with and through the end of our current civilization. Sorry. sorry, so I have some sort of a typo, sorry about that. The truth now is that we have to learn to die not as individuals, but as civilization. The sooner we confront our situation and realize that there's nothing we can do to save ourselves, the sooner we can get down to the difficult task of adapting with mortal humility to our new reality. So this is a very pessimistic quote from Royce Scranton, which I'm going to juxtapose with a quote from Lawrence Buell, who is an American professor and a founder of eco-criticism as an academic discipline. And Buell says this at the beginning of the 21st century. He says, the ecological crisis is the crisis of the imagination. And so when we come to this point, I hope it becomes clear how the arts and poetry, how literature can help us to deal with this crisis. What does it mean that the ecological crisis is the crisis of the imagination? So first of all, what it means is that it's not just a technical problem, right? The planetary crisis is not just a technical problem. It's not just that we need new technical solutions, because we already have technical solutions. The problem is that for some reasons, the right technical solutions are not being implemented because we think it is impossible. You know, when you tell people, for instance, okay, we know what to do, we have to go zero emissions by, you know, like within the next decade or 2 decades, and everybody will say, oh, impossible, right? Because economy, the serious science will tell you that we need this constant growth, right? And so here is where we can encounter this crisis of the imagination. Why can't we imagine a different kind of future rather than the apocalyptic future, right? Why is it easier for us to imagine the apocalypse rather than to imagine alternative solutions where we actually do make the necessary changes? So poetry of the self-conscious Anthropocene. I'm really finishing now because this has probably already been too long. They're just some titles, so it's not important. I'll just quickly tell you what the poets are doing. So how the poets themselves define the tasks for poetry. I don't like to talk about the tasks for poetry because anybody who's an artist knows that it's hard to, to say that you have a task as an artist. But it seems like from the poetry that I've been reading in recent years, those are the steps that this art form is taking. So the first step is tell the truth, right? Welcome the pain of knowing, which results, of course, in the work of mourning, right? So see the truth. We need to see the truth. Question anthropocentrism. Grzegorz Kość explained this earlier, so I won't go into this. Reject this dichotomy of nature and culture. There is no outside to nature. There is no outside to ecology, right? The term nature doesn't even make any sense. We have to change this language. This language is obsolete, right? Like when you look at this poem by Walt Whitman now, it's an obsolete poem. It hasn't aged well. It doesn't serve us anymore. Decolonize. I wish I had another lecture to tell you why this is so important, but maybe next time. Now, the term ecopoetics, which is a term that I've been working with for many years, suggests in the first place that all of the processes and phenomena on the earth are interconnected, right? Including everything that we do. We are not individuals in a biological sense. Everything is connected with everything else. Our bodies are, made up of human cells, but we contain more bacterial cells than human cells. Actually, every human organism contains more bacterial cells than human cells. So this notion of separation is wrong. Now, how do we overcome this separation? It seems like the challenge is to resituate the humans in ecological terms and to restate the non-human in ethical terms. Look for new forms of knowledge, because we need a kind of epistemological revolution, how we know things, how we learn about things. Because we need this new way of seeing, right? Or this less aggressive way of seeing. So to end where we began, we have to see the earth, and that's what poetry is also working towards. We need to see the earth as an interconnected web of processes and relations, beings and phenomena to which we belong, right? So we have to change this seeing from this seeing in order to excavate to the seeing in order to connect and form collectives. Actually, I love the word collective. And the very last image is this. It comes from a Berlin-based artist. It should move, actually. It's a sculpture that is made for mushrooms. Or actually, it's the mycelium, right, of fungi responding to music. So it's a kind of a sculpture that is made in collaboration with fungi. Fungi are important. That will be the last thing I say. And this is the optimistic thing, believe me, please. So thank you very much. And sorry for taking too long.
Thank you, Professor Fiedorczuk, for this lively, friendly, helpful, super lucid lecture, which slowed down sometimes to make important and memorable points. Let's have the choir sing another song for us. Shall we stand for it? Gaudeamus Igitur, which is sung at many universities in Europe. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us for this. My hope is this semester will be satisfying for you. I'm hoping I'm more right than Professor Basiuk. We are getting back to in-person teaching. Largely, I can go with the term risk management. We will be doing a lot of that, certainly. But I hope this means we will be seeing one another more often, and you will have a chance to reconstruct your student, or rebuild your student life after the pandemic. Thank you.